Hi, parents, and welcome back to another episode of From the Teacher's Desk, practical advice for parents of neurodiverse kids. Today, I want to speak directly to parents who have just received or are about to receive a diagnosis for their child. This moment changes everything: the dreams that you once had for your child, and the simple, unshaken hope that they would thrive easily. All of this suddenly starts feeling uncertain and a little bit shaky. And it's okay to grieve, because you're not grieving your child. You're grieving the death of a dream that started in your mind the minute you knew that your baby was coming. We discussed the stages of grief in the previous video, but when parents first hear that something may be wrong, many do go through the stages of grief because it is so hard to let go of the dream that you once had for your child. The stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and eventually acceptance. But being in a state of acceptance doesn't necessarily mean that your grief is over. It means that you are finally in a position where you can consider options for moving forward in a way that can help your child. And being in the state of acceptance also doesn't necessarily mean that you will stay there. The stages of grief are like a cycle. It's the same emotional process as any major loss. But before all of this, there is a stage that nobody really speaks about. What happens before the diagnosis? There's usually a frustrating trail of phone calls, school meetings, and reports where your child may already have been misunderstood, and where you, in fact, may still be holding on to your dream that might not be necessarily identical to the reality of who your child actually is. Before a diagnosis, schools often respond to behaviors instead of the child themselves. And behaviors are labeled instead of analyzed. A child who can't sit still is labeled as disruptive, and a child who can't finish his work is labeled as lazy. And depending on your culture or background, assumptions can enter, stereotypes creep in, and families may sometimes feel judged instead of supported. Schools must do better. But while the system catches up, you as a parent can learn to shift the story and reclaim the narrative. You can help others see your child differently, but it all starts with how you see your child yourself. Before you can reclaim the narrative, you need to acknowledge where your child actually is. Pause and have a really good look at them, not through a list of concerns, but through their reality. What brings them joy? What frustrates them? When do they shine? And what is hard right now? Then you can say to yourself, this is where my child is today, and that's okay. That's not giving up hope, that's meeting them where they are. And that's the foundation of meaningful advocacy. Once you do that, you can start reclaiming the narrative and making sure the story told about your child includes their strength, their progress, and their sparks. Because too often, the story sounds like this: he is defiant, she's inattentive, he's behind. And when you hear that said about your child, pause. You have every right to say, can we talk about what's behind that behavior? Reclaiming the narrative means shifting conversations from blame to understanding, from deficit to difference. And here's what it could sound like in practice. Instead of hearing, Billy never finishes his work, you should hear, Billy has difficulty starting tasks. We used a timer for 2 weeks, but it didn't really help. Now we're trying a visual checklist. That's respectful data. That's constructive. It tells a story of learning, not failure. Because your child isn't a list of deficiencies. They're a human being learning at their own pace and at their own rhythm. When you walk into school meetings, you don't need to be defensive, but you need to be prepared. Advocacy isn't about arguing, it's about guiding the conversation. Ask questions such as, What has been tried so far? What data do we have about when this behavior occurs? And what's one step that we can try together? These questions put you in the role of partner, not adversary. And when a meeting becomes negative or repetitive, it's okay to pause and say, I'd like to focus on solutions. What can we do next? This boundary protects both your child and your peace. The truth is, your child doesn't need to be fixed. They need to be understood. They're not a statistic or a graph point. They're a growing, feeling, thinking person, and their story is still unfolding. Your role as a parent is not to erase the diagnosis, it's to help the people around them see them for who they actually are. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. There's a whole community of teachers and parents who are walking the same path and learning to support instead of shame. Thank you so much for joining me here. If this episode helped you, please share it with another parent who's starting their journey, because the more we talk about it, the more the understanding grows. See you next time from the Teacher's Desk.